welcome everybody joining us this afternoon. And again, back to our Chess Network monthly webinar. This month, our topic is Women in Art. And we have Alice and Joyce from Asia Society. And Alice is the Chief Executive and Alice is the head of the gallery. Thank you, ladies, for joining us today. And please, everybody bear with me because I am a knob in art and I hope to learn a lot from you ladies today. I think we can start now. I see us on Facebook and I see our audience are joining. So, Alice, good afternoon. Joyce, good afternoon. Why don't we start with Alice? Can you tell us more about your past experience in the art industry, your time in New York, your time abroad, and how you joined Asia Society?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Calvin, for including Asia Society Hong Kong on this webcast, and we're really delighted to be here. I'll start off by telling you a bit about Asia Society Hong Kong and then how I came into this position. Asia Society Hong Kong is part of this global network of 14 center. Asia Society was first founded in the United States in New York in 1956 by John D. Rockefeller III. Mr. Rockefeller had a wonderful Asian art collection that he and his family collected throughout their travels to Asia from 1900s onwards. So he created Asia Society Museum, and he also created an Asia Society to promote understanding of Asia by Americans. So this is 1956. Here in Hong Kong, we were created in 1990. And the reason we were created at that time of a very interesting time in Hong Kong's history, 7 years before the handover, is to promote the understanding of Asians, among Asians, but also understanding of the United States. But with US being so big on soft power, I think the Americans or the Asians or Hong Kong understanding of US is actually quite significant. But very much our mission here now at Asia Society Hong Kong is also to promote the understanding of Asia today. In arts and culture, in business and policy and education. So that's what our mission is about. And in about 10 years ago, we were able to open this wonderful site here in Admiralty on 9 Justice Drive. We really welcome visitors to come to see our exhibition. We have an exhibition and we have programs and we have members and the site is open to the public. So please come and join us. Myself, I joined Asia Society when I first arrived in Hong Kong. I'm not from Hong Kong. I'm a Chinese American. I arrived in Hong Kong in 1992 as a young person working in Hong Kong. And I became a member of Asia Society Hong Kong in 1993 and have been a member since for many years. And I left 2002 to go back to New York to work in the nonprofit sector. And when I was in New York, one of the organizations I ran was called Museum of Chinese in America. It's a history museum, but we also do arts and culture. And I had an opportunity to come back to Hong Kong in 2011. And when I came back, I resumed my activity, my connection with Asia Society Hong Kong, and I helped to open the center in 2012 in our new home. And I always loved museums. I've been a museum geek ever since I was a kid, ever since my first museum when I was a little girl going to the Palace Museum in Taipei with my father and brother. And so whenever I travel, inevitably my first stop is museum, whether it's art museum, history museum. And so for me, I think museums and gallery and anything that's arts and culture that promotes the understanding of arts and culture is really important to understand that country. So I'm really delighted that now I had a career in government, I had a career in the private sector, and now my career is in this nonprofit called Asia Society Hong Kong. And art is very much part of our, like Asia Society Museum, art is very much part of our DNA, along with business and policy. And that's how I ended up here as the executive director of Asia Society Hong Kong.
Yeah, it also sounds like art is part of your life too.
Yes, very much.
Okay, hi Joyce. Can you kindly introduce yourself? We would like to know more about you. how you got into the art industry and how you started working with Asia Society.
Sure. So hello everyone on the JES network this afternoon. My name is Joyce, and I'm head of gallery and exhibitions at Asia Society Hong Kong Center, and I work very closely with Alice with the day-to-day sort of oversight of the gallery building itself, which sits in the Admiralty site that Alice just mentioned. We are actually open to the public almost every day, from Tuesday to Sunday, 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. The gallery is open and free of charge to all members of the public. And this is a fact that not many people seem to be aware of, so I wanted to highlight that in the sense that the gallery is a space for all. It just so happens that right now, our current exhibition is a photography exhibition, which hopefully will be welcoming a lot of you to visit next week. And as for myself, I have not, of course, had the experience that Alice has had, but Asia Society has been in my life since I was a student in New York, where there is an Asia Society Center as well. To me, it was really a place about sort of bridging cultures, and it was a nonprofit that I knew of. It was also a place that I could come to learn as a supplement to my own university studies in New York as a student of art history and literature. And so when I came back to Hong Kong, also for work, it was really exciting for me to see that Asia Society had almost moved with me. And the center has been in action and in operations for the past decade. And we're very proud to celebrate that this year. It's not easy running anything for a decade, and to be a building that still exists is pretty cool. And so I found my way to Asia Society quite naturally after more than a decade of working in the arts. And now it's a privilege to be able to plan and put up art exhibitions for everyone to see.
Thank you, Joyce, and thank you for being our guide during next week's visit. Alice, back to you. Can you tell us more about how your experience in the art industry has evolved throughout all these years, and the different cultures in New York and Hong Kong? Alice, you have muted. Sorry.
Sorry. My own experience, having worked in New York for a decade before coming back here in Hong Kong, is been really enlightening. When I was here in the 90s, I have to say I was busy with work, and although I did go to the museums, many of the wonderful museums ran by LCSD and some of the gallery, I wasn't that exposed to the arts and cultural industry or the ecosystem here in Hong Kong. But in New York, many of the institutions were like the MoMA, the Met, a small museum like Frick has been around for almost 100 years, in the Met's case, 150 years. So I really took advantage of it, and I became a member. I went to all, as many shows as I could. So when I had the privilege of running this Museum of Chinese in America in Chinatown, my interest was telling the stories of Chinese in America. So although it had a history elements to it, they were also artists. We had our first art exhibition at the new space in Mocha was Xu Bing, many of the Chinese contemporary artists who call New York home. So I feel art is a wonderful tool to tell our story. I mean, if you look at Chinese painting, whether it's sanshui, landscape, the traditional calligraphy, Chinese culture, artists has been using, the art to tell our stories. In some ways, you don't need to understand a language. Visual art is a wonderful way to understand a language. But I found that there weren't that many institutions in New York doing that. I mean, you had Asia Society, you had some museums who were beginning to collect Chinese contemporary art, Asian contemporary art. So for me, coming back to Hong Kong about 11 years ago to see the blossoming of the art network and the artists, not just here in Hong Kong, but Asia, and that Asia Society Hong Kong can help present it. It was such a wonderful, it was great because now art is not just, when we go to museum now, a lot of times the big museums are generally the Western Museum. You talk about the Tate, you talk about British Museum. In Asia, I know growing up in Taiwan, there was the Taipei of the Palace Museum. And then of course, in China, you have the Palace Museum in Beijing. And then you also, this last decade or so, the growth of these private museum or individual museums in all over China. And that was really wonderful to see. So for me, coming back and to celebrate this voice, it was always there, but there wasn't that many institutions to showcase it. So right now, what we're really excited about here at Asia Society Hong Kong Center is in this 10 years, we've done over 30 exhibitions on Asian artists, and many of them Hong Kong artists. We're especially proud of this series that we launched about 6 years ago, Chinese Contemporary Women Artists series. We asked a question: how come we don't hear about Chinese contemporary women artists? We know there are Zhao Wuqi, we know there are Wu Guanzhong, we know there are Zhu Dequn, but how come we're the women? And once you ask that question, the answer came out. There were these women artists, they just were under the radar, underrepresented. And so we were able to do a series with some of the funding from ADC, from the community, presenting 4 women artists, Fang Zhaolin, Pan Yuliang, Irene Zhou, and the latest one was Xie Jinglan, La Lang. And that's some kind of the things that Asia Society Hong Kong is doing. And so people talked about Hong Kong being a cultural desert. I would have to disagree. I even said that in the 90s. I think it was always there. Hong Kong culture was always there, whether it's through film, music, or visual arts, but it's just that there weren't that many institutions or gallery presenting it. And now this last decade, the Hong Kong Art Gallery Association has grown. They have more galleries now than they ever did more than 20 years ago. We now have M+. The Museum of Art has refurbished itself. And so right now it's really exciting time to be in Asia and to be in Hong Kong specifically. I mean, how many cities can you say that in the matter of 7 months has 2 major global museums that came online in Palace and also M+. So that's something that we in Hong Kong have to be really proud of. And I'm glad that Asia Society Hong Kong has been able to play a role in furthering, I think, the understanding of arts and culture, or the dialogue of understanding of arts and culture through the artists and the exhibitions that we're able to present.
Thank you, Alice. A question to both ladies. When we talk about art, the perception is a very male-dominant space. Is that true, or is it that there are actually a lot of ladies working behind the scene that we don't know of, like you ladies? If I hadn't studied and if I hadn't got a chance to meet you ladies, I wouldn't know anything. But is it true that it's still a male-dominant space, or it has been changing through the years? We also see the new director of M+ is also a lady, which she's one of our most successful awardees this year, which we're very glad to have met her. I think us and the audience would like to know how the scenario has changed throughout the years. Maybe Alice first and then Joyce.
Joyce and I are 2 different generations, right? I'm a bit older than Joyce, and then Joyce can talk about her perception. But when I came into running museums and running, in the arts and cultural sector, yes, it is in some sectors, in some section of our museum is male dominated, and the art scene is male dominated. But that is changing. And I think it has changed a lot this last decade. But traditionally, I mean, I think I shared an example with you the other day. I remember going to the Prado, one of the most beautiful, most famous museum in the world in Madrid. And they had top 100 artwork you should not miss when you go to the Prado. And I remember picking up the list, and out of the 100 best artwork, there was only one female artist. And remember, Prado is, you know, the artwork is traditional, older, European, and all of that. And so traditionally, and even to this day, when people collect male artists, generally they're priced, they're more expensive. They sell just because they've been in the scene longer as artists or as curators or as art administrators. If you think about the institutions, some of the Museum of Art, the Met, they've been around 150 years. Most of their early directors or board members were men. I mean, that was just the way, you know, they were the one making money. And it's only recently you're hearing about women collectors and women joining the boards of these institutions. And, you know, I think the last 2 decades or 3 decades, I think women have made great strides. You mentioned Suhanya. She had a wonderful career in Australia. And before coming to Hong Kong. So I think the role of women in these cultural institutions are changing. It's become better. But if you look at artists, women artists, I think it's still, in fact, if you want to get into collecting, many of the collectors really like collecting women artists because they said it's really affordable. It's a great way to get into collecting. Because, you know, if you look at traditionally the auction houses, look at how much Andy Warhol commanded recently. The top auction, the artworks have been men, and only because they've been on the scene longer. Doesn't mean the women aren't there. It's just that they weren't the focus. And so I remember mentioning this Artemisia Gentileschi. You know, I think she was probably the only woman artist out of that 100 I told you at Prado. And that just, she was an artist herself. Her father taught her, and she had a wonderful career. But the institution didn't promote women artists back then. And it's only this last few decades we're seeing the spotlight on women artists, women administrators, and you know, women are now in the workforce. It's only after World War II, right? You see more women in the workplace, and so that also is one of the reasons we're now seeing the impact of women in the arts and culture sector. It is growing, but and I think it is improving.
Joyce, over to you. You have been in the art industry for quite some time, and from the private sector into NGO right now. Maybe you can share about your experience and how things have changed.
Sure. And my perspective is, you know, comes from a different angle to what Alice has perhaps experienced. I started my career in Hong Kong and then Shanghai, and then spent a decent amount of time with London as a base and traveling throughout Europe. And not always in the non-profit sector. In fact, I spent a lot of time working for an auction house where the organizational setup of that company's 250-year history was entrenched with a certain, quite a heavy dose of Britishness, actually. And so sometimes it's quite difficult to differentiate between sort of national pride, perhaps, or a very British cultural way of doing things versus a binary sort of male-female divide. So for a company that was, you know, heavily female, what I noticed as a young professional was that it struck me as interesting, although not necessarily negative, that it seemed like the ultimate decision makers always landed with a man in a boardroom. Although that seemed so far away from me as a young professional, it didn't seem to quite matter at that point. Because my day-to-day involved working with essentially all-female teams, even to this day where I lead an all-female team myself. So on the day-to-day, it didn't feel like such a distressing point. But I suppose when you look at it from a sort of macro perspective, you know, does it really make sense? And I guess all I can say from a very personal way is that I've always been more attached to the work at hand rather than the people around it. So it doesn't matter so much to me whether the percentage in a room, the gender breakdown in a room is heavily leaning towards, the male spectrum rather than the female. As long as we can all get things done, to me, it didn't matter. Perhaps I was brought up with a sort of like a gender blindness. I wouldn't, it's not the first indication of someone's work effectiveness to know whether or not they're male or female. So that's definitely a perspective in itself, that it doesn't strike me as odd or interesting whether there are more men or more women in a room. But from an artistic perspective, which Alice touched on, is that in the collecting space, I think male art collectors are just more prone to making more noise. Perhaps men like to show off about what they've bought. And even if female collectors are equally as active and spending as much or even more money on art that they love, they just don't shout about it. And nowadays, with the advent of social media and sort of self-promotion and the perhaps not needing to rely on certain print publishing deadlines, people, it's a very individual experience, whether or not you're male or female, whether or not you want to tell the world that you own a certain art piece is now very much sort of self-empowered. And that's definitely a shift, a huge shift from, you could say, a pre-Instagram and post-Instagram era and all that, related social media. But even, harking back further back in history, to the Artemisia Gentileschi sort of era in the Baroque period, I think, in the arc of art history, because art schools were reserved for men and it was a completely 100% male arena where the only woman in the room would be either the mother or the cleaner, or the naked model, then obviously things are stacked against women. Like there was no representation. So if you're comparing with that, then we've made great strides. Then again, back to just the art, which is most interesting to me, because we are coming from a tradition where all the art students and all their teachers and then all their graduates are men, what they're interested in portraying and creating as artwork in themselves are obviously very predominantly heterosexual male. So even though women may not be represented in the top 100 artists at the El Prado Museum that Alice mentioned, women are still sneakily represented in some ways, in the sense that the artwork that makes top record prices or are most adored are always female faces. I mean, just look at the Mona Lisa, just look at the Odalisque. Unsurprisingly, most of them are naked, but still, there's nothing to be sorry for if the female form is adored. And so in that sense, women are all around. And I always find that a bit of a relief when I assess whether or not there is female representation in the art world. We're there, it's just whether or not people recognize it as being there. Yeah.
Thank you, Joyce. To the audience, we will be taking questions during the Q&A section later on during this webinar. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop it in the Q&A box, which is in the bottom of your screen. And for our audience on Facebook, please post your questions in the comment. We have a team of colleagues that will be looking after all the Q&A box and the chat room. So if you have questions, please feel free to drop them in and we'll answer them later. Okay, back to you ladies. During our pre-webinar meeting, we talked about how artists back then has less of a way to promote themselves, mostly all being done throughout the galleries and the gallery owners. And now, since we just talked on the topic pre and post Instagram era, we may call it, is it much easier for the female artists or artists in general to promote themselves, or are they still keen on letting the gallery do all the promotions for them? Maybe Alice?
I think gallery always, has a wonderful role to play because they're the one that's promoting the artist, and I think the gallery now, I think Joyce's point about the post and pre-Instagram world is really valid. It's that now artists themselves can promote, and do they really still need the galleries? I would say in some instance, yes. The galleries, for example, if you look at the art fairs, the art Basels, and the art centrals, the galleries are the one that invests, in the promotion, and they're the one that pay for the booth, promoting the artists, and the artists themselves can always do that. So I think it just gives them the tool now with the technology. They can do it themselves, and they can also rely on the galleries, and the galleries themselves are also using these digital tools. And I think that personal relationship is still I think very important. I find that I don't know if Joyce will agree with me. Like sometimes artists, they're really good at creating their artwork, but they're not very good at promoting themselves. Yes, they can post the stuff on Instagram and share it on social media, but it is still in this age of so much on social media, so much on Instagram, you still need somebody who is dedicated to help you tell your story better, the narrative of your story. And I think the gallery will always have that role. And it's really interesting now to see also the rise of some of the most powerful gallerists now are women gallerists. You're seeing that again. That's that growth, which is really good to see. And the women gallerists are representing male and female artists, right? Or trans artists or whatever. It doesn't matter. Art is art. And so right now, I think we're living in this really exciting time of if you have a good artwork, you yourself can do it, or you can rely on collaboration with other people to do it. But right now, personally, for me, as an Asian American, as a Chinese American, I would like to see more artists, their work, artists who look like me, or presenting our perspective of how we see the world. Same thing with literature. I just feel like there is a rise of Asia. Asia is changing. It's no longer just a colonial, like even Hong Kong. I mean, in this last 25 years, look at how much Hong Kong has changed. And I think the role of artists is more important than ever. And it's more important that we see Asian artists, women artists, and just artists in general. I feel artists is like a soul to a civilization. And so I really do feel it's very important that we do not underestimate them or put them as a sideshow, but I think they should have the main stage as well.
Joyce?
Yeah, the role, what the role of galleries is in this day and age could be an entirely separate subject in itself. But I think it's important to consider both the changing roles of the galleries and the changing roles of the artist kind of together. It's like a symbiotic relationship. The way they develop and face the digital media age is very interesting. And, just as we've discussed before, like just simply because there are social media tools and it's easier to self-promote, it doesn't necessarily mean that artists enjoy self-promoting. So there's definitely more peer pressure around it because perhaps other classmates in art school are doing it to get ahead, get more visibility. But what perhaps art school teachers and people who surround artists and people who love them might counter and advise is that with digital media there are more distractions, which can sometimes take away from the art making process itself. And this is nothing about gatekeeping or being exclusive. It's just there is a finite amount of time in the day to be awake, alert, energetic, and creating, or to be in a creative mood. And I think what started off as amusing and fun digital engagement has now become a chore. I mean, some people check Instagram the way they check emails. And, it can easily eat into 2-3 hours of your day every morning just just going through the motions and working your way through, DMs and direct messages and the like. So I think what's important is that galleries can help sustain the livelihoods of artists by taking away some of that, the burden of the everyday and the menial tasks of, daily life admin. So it's an interesting space that's evolving for sure.
So us as a traditional media, we do both print and digital. How can we help promote the art industry or even some artists? Should we be able to locate them or they come to us? What role do we play as a media?
Mm-hmm. I think more coverage about art itself is always a positive. The in-depth interviews with artists themselves, coverage of their work, and actually attending their shows and seeing it for yourself. It's sort of educating the journalists and the editors themselves first, perhaps as the eyes for the readership first. I think a lot of publications are quick to just do a listing, but there isn't that contextual placing of, well, why should I spend my Saturday afternoon going to an art gallery? And even though I work in art myself and I'm surrounded by it day in, day out, I don't presume that it's the priority for everybody in this world. So I think it's that linking up, that connecting, the giving you the why, what, when, and why is the most important question to answer. So it, covering also female artists or female artists, whether it be a solo show or a group show, or highlighting where their work might be in existing collections in Hong Kong, could be an endless feature. There are, even though Asia Society itself is not an acquisitions museum, there are public institutions like the Hong Kong Museum of Art, like M+, like the Heritage Museum, who have long-term collections that feature female artists that are never mentioned. So it's kind of being more conscientious and digging into what's already here rather than making anything up.
Alice?
Well, I do agree with what Joyce said about the context. I think the role of the media can do is, again, there's so much noise out there. Social media has its pluses and minuses. And I think I've been fascinated with the role of curators. Curators curate exhibitions and so on, but media company or media outlets like yourself, curating the content. So because you only have limited amount of space in terms of, to show an exhibition. It's just real estate. And so, especially during this time of this last 2 years when we were locked down, closed and whatever, I find some of the magazines or some of the printed media and virtual media, they offer the virtual tours. So you, as a media company, can also curate online. As much as I wanted to go out to see these physical shows, this last 2 years, we haven't been able to travel, have we? But you can still, through these media portals, virtual exhibitions. So I think the role of curation and putting things in context is something that I think all media outlets can play. And some we have certain outlets that specialize in art, but even with the Just Network, what you're doing is exactly that should be done. Is like-minded. If people are interested in art, you can take them, introduce them to this world virtually first, and then it's almost like doing a homework. So I think the role of curation is not just for the curator of art. I think media company, you can also be curator of content. And the content is not just, it's also understanding. I mean, because right now, certain exhibitions, I find that, museums, they show the art. This is the Mona Lisa. Well, beautiful women smiling, a lot of people in front of it. but so what? And I still think the words matter. I think the telling of the story and putting into context, I think is something that media company, media platform can really help. And also educating young people, about, giving it a context, giving it depth. That is something I think is also quite important.
My team is listening, so they better be taking notes and doing their homework. Okay, when it comes to creating content, this is exactly what we do, and thank you for the hint. And I would like to ask for more hint, because since we are talking about women in art, and it's actually since May we've been talking about Art Month, and actually I would call this year the year of art, because we have two brand new museums in Hong Kong that just recently opened, and I'm planning to take my daughters there because they love drawing. I would like to ask, is there any Asian artists or Hong Kong artists that we should be paying attention at the moment or down the road? My team better be taking notes, please. Alice?
For me, I find all of the artists that, since I've been back to Hong Kong 11 years ago, fascinating. We all know Hong Kong has gone through a lot of ups and downs this last couple of years. And I think through these artists, they tell the story. It's when you have conflict. In fact, I think there was a famous quote during time of the Renaissance, when there is a lot of conflict, you have the emergence of the Caravaggios, of the Da Vinci's, and so on. And artists, they have a lot to say during times of upheaval, up and down. And I see that in Hong Kong artists. They may not, I think I'm going to get into trouble here about art and politics, but I think art inherently is political. And so artists, I find Hong Kong artists, their vernacular, their story is so much interesting these days. And they were always interesting. I'm not saying they weren't, but it just, again, the spotlight weren't on them. We did a show a couple of years ago. It's called about Hong Kong artists. And to this show, to this day, I love what they have to say. They look at a situation in a way that's pros and cons. And I think this particular show was also featured in New York Times. Some of these artists, I don't want to name names. I think look at our Asia Society website. You'll see this Hong Kong art, the artist series. They all have something to say, and I think I love all of them. If I could collect. And in fact, some of them I have bought their work. I won't tell you who they are because that would not be fair. But I just feel like through their eyes, I understand Hong Kong in a way that that I didn't before. And through their eyes, they're reflecting Hong Kong today, all the ups and downs. And so I find that artists are wonderful storytellers. And I think just keep an open mind, and is what I would say. And I think I especially love some of the women artists that we've seen here in Hong Kong these days. Their work is just tremendous, and it's great to see that. And my favorite artists, the four women artists I mentioned to you, I have to say, when I started that series, I had no idea who none of these Fan Zhaoling, Pan Yuliang, Irene Zhou or Xie Jinglan were. I've been going to the museum since I was a kid, and through their work, I understand their time better. And I do think, right now, I think artists is our wonderful lens to look at the world. And so I think Hong Kong artists, I'm a big fan of Hong Kong artists these days. And I would encourage you, ask questions. I think they're asking questions, as some of us are asking. And whether I go to the Museum of Art or the Mill or M+, when I see these Hong Kong artists these days, I'm impressed with what they have to say.
Okay, Joyce?
Yeah, with artists, short of name dropping and giving a roll call, I think what's more interesting is actually to remember that artists are humans that thrive on dialogue. And it's just that the setup of the art world is not such a hierarchical structure that makes it easy to slot them into where they are in their careers or what they might be open to talk about. So it's really, as Alice mentioned, asking the questions, not hounding them, but making artists feel that we care, that we are aware, that we know that they're creating work. Sometimes that's all you need to keep going, to know that someone cares about your work. And a practical way of doing this is to visit the shows and to go visit their exhibitions, to see what they're up to and what they're doing. And one day you might run into the artists themselves, which I often have on occasion without particularly, calling them up to meet them on a specific occasions. And those chance interactions are sometimes the best. That's where you have the most interesting conversations and learn the most about the artistic output or ideas behind a specific artwork. And just because it's on my mind, yesterday was the results of the DSE examinations, correct?
Yeah.
And similarly, actually around this time is the graduation show of several art schools in the city, or if not art schools, then tertiary institutions, universities who offer an art making visual arts division. So not just the analysis of artwork, but the actual creation of it. And you ask yourselves, Hong Kong people are very, very willing and very adaptable and very naturally will go visit more than one shopping mall over the weekend. And so my challenge to you, Calvin, and anyone who's listening is, how many graduation shows have you seen this month? There are more than a dozen. And, it's not difficult to reach. You go to Baptist U, Chinese University, Hong Kong Art Center, Poly U, City U. Every year, there are reams and reams of new graduates, of people trying to make something meaningful in terms of their artwork. And going to see that show could be a really educational 1 or 2 hours. And more than that, it's free. They just want your attention. And that could be a really stimulating visual experience rather than just going shopping.
Yeah. Again, my team should be taking notes and better find out what's going on out there. Okay. I have a question for Joyce. Yesterday we were talking about, because you're from the auction house background, and we talked about most of the collectible art pieces are mostly men. How has that changed within these decades or so? Are we seeing more female artists that it's being followed or people are going after?
I'm not sure that anymore. If you think about, the human race has only survived because there is some sort of equity between the number of men and women who populate this world. But for sure, there's been revisionist art history taking place. There have been auction houses supporting the work of female artists more. It used to be very often that, similar to musicians or other art forms, a lot of couples are formed who do the same line of work. So you'll have 2 painters who are married to each other, but it's always the husband who got more attention. It's like Frida Kahlo and her husband Diego, her work was only known after her death, whereas her husband's work was very well known while he was still alive. So these disparities, I think, are closing up a bit simply because the world has moved on, but also the supporting narration and the storytelling now seeks to include the female voice as well, because perhaps it's a female journalist who's writing the article. Naturally, they'll want to feature a friend who became an artist, right? There are just more of those organic happenings happening. But for sure, there was no one 10 years ago who put up a sign and said, now we need to feature war women. And in fact, when that was said more than a decade ago, people thought, again, it was perhaps just a fad or just another token moment of diversity. No one thought this movement would continue. And of course it has, in the wider wider ways of the world with the Me Too movement and things like that. We're not going to just, quiet down and go away. Hopefully this will be a continual progression.
Alice, you also mentioned another Asian artist, a Hong Kong artist, that it was the husband who was famous until the husband passed away. The spotlight went on to the wife. Can you talk about the story again?
Yes, I met Chi Choyanchi. She is the wife of Hong Chi-fan. And Chi is, I think, an educator herself. She has a lot of students that she taught. But she herself was a really interesting artist. It still is practicing artist. Her work is collected by museum and institutions. So about 2 years ago, I think beginning of the COVID, she was part of a group show at the Hong Kong Museum of Art, and I had a chance to visit it with her. And what I found interesting with her artwork was that a lot of, in the 70s and I think 70s, or she was doing a lot of performance art, arts, doing site-specific arts, performance arts in museums or really interesting spaces. Some of the work she's doing reminded me of kind of like Marina Abramovich or some of these women or Yoko Ono. And I find that, but because I think a lot of people know her as an educator and also wife of Hong Chi-fan, but her artwork was just as interesting. But she maybe didn't spend as much time, and I don't know if she was ever, her artwork is probably harder to be represented by gallery or something. So I find that I whenever I see her work now, I take a double look. It's like, wow. Very much kind of ahead of her time, or not ahead of her time. She was of her time, but appreciation of art, her work, I think we're now finally getting there. I think we're catching up with her, and I think Joyce mentioned Frida Kahlo. Again, it was her husband who became famous first, but now Frida Kahlo's show is also a blockbuster when you go on these circuits, exhibitions around the world. Same thing with Elena Kunich. Again, her husband's work was commanding so much more money, and now we're taking a look at her. So I find these wives, these partners, their work are just as interesting, and I think they really deserve a good second look, and for collectors as well as museum curators. But Chi is certainly one of my favorite Hong Kong contemporary women artists.
Thank you. Back to Jack's Network, we are all about connect, inspire, and empower. Before we go into Connect, we are now inspired by you ladies, how you have contributed and worked within the art industry. And we will come back to Connect later, because I have a friend who just WhatsApped me who is listening to our webinar now. They are doing a virtual art fair. We'll come to that in a bit. They want to connect with you ladies. I will put that through later. Empowerment. How do we go about empowering younger generations of artists in Hong Kong? Joyce? Or how Asian society is going to, any program that you guys are doing that will help empower them?
Well, with the development of every show, we really consider the timing of it and its relevance to the audience at that particular time. It's never just a laundry list that we have to tick off. So sometimes we come up with an idea, and then say COVID happens, and then we realize the idea might sound off color or not as relevant, especially now when we are all reaching for our own personal stories and identity and what makes a city survive, So this might not be the best time for a fluffy exhibition or something too comical. We want something to bind and bond people together. And associated with that is the artists involved with every exhibition. We are lucky to have a space in which we can provide a platform for artists, like a physical space. And so very often we seek to put on group shows so that more people can share the spotlight and have a chance to be known to a wider public. That's a very practical way of involving more people. you'll find that many curators and exhibition planners are loath to do this, but because involving more people means more work, right? And more diaries, more conflicts, more potential for conflict. But we're willing to do this because we think it's worthwhile. So group shows rather than solo shows can offer more people a chance to be involved. Also, besides physical exhibition that usually run on for a couple of months, we also do a lot of art education and supportive programming. So even if your artwork is not physically displayed on site at our gallery, we still invite working artists and contemporary artists working in the art industry to have a voice. You know, like this webinar, we would ask artists working to come in, and we filmed actually a series called Photographers and Dialogue with Photography. And it was really recording their response to our current photography exhibition. You know, whether or not coming to visit the show has changed their perspective on things, or how it might influence the way they take their photographs in the future. So it's that connection and influencing and putting into context as well. And that has been really enlightening for us. And so the empowerment that you speak of, Calvin, I think it's really important that it goes both ways. It's not just about me, how do I feel? You know, the work that we do at Asia Society hopefully makes us stronger and makes our external working parties feel that way as well, feel more empowered as well. So everyone comes away from something feeling that they've learned something.
Okay. Alice, any advice to the young artists or those who want to become an artist?
My advice to these young artists is really find mentors and also listen and also get out there. I think sometimes artists themselves are very solitary creatures, and I think and I think some of them, they become artists because they are that. But I think it is really finding people who can listen to them. Sometimes it's gallerists, sometimes it's mentors, sometimes collectors. So I'm the kind of person, I used to hate, I'm still not very good at a public, you know, if you go to a reception, 100 people, I get very nervous, but I'm really good. I love that one-to-one dialogue with people. So I think artists, find your own niche and you know, you're not going to be, you know, not everybody is going to be a superstar. Not everybody's going to be these well-known, you know, Andy Warhol, and even Andy Warhol during his lifetime, I'm not sure was that successful. It's after many of the artists is after they die and that they become well-known. I mean, Van Gogh is a really, really good one, but Van Gogh's family and his sister-in-law truly promoted him after his death. So for me right now, I think my advice to artists is really be out there, and out there meaning it could be through your gallery, through your own social media, but engage. And I especially think this last 2 or 3 years, this 2 years of COVID, we've all for what, you know, had to isolate or whatever. It's been really hard on everyone. And I think for me, artists heals, artists bridge. And I think their role as healers in this time is more important than ever. So I think my advice is get yourself out there and, you know, talk to people and let people know your work, let people know your story.
Thank you both. Actually, we have a few questions from our audience. One of them is from actually two questions from our most successful women awardees. First question, let's see. Question from what needs to be done to develop and establish Hong Kong as a East meets West Center for International Cultural Exchange? Alice?
Well, I think we're already doing a bit of that. I mean, a lot of it. I mean, if you look at the art fair, the success of the, you know, the two art fair, you know, Art Basel is here in Hong Kong. It's in Miami. It's in Basel. And then I think later on this year in October, they're going to have some sort of presence in Paris. So I think the art market is very, very global. And I think Hong Kong, even before the art fair, through the auction houses, has already played a very important role. In fact, if you look at Christie's and Sotheby's, they've been working with collectors here for the last 4 or 5 decades. So I think Hong Kong already are kind of a step ahead with other Asian cities. And I think we just need to continue to promote that role. And I think what Invest Hong Kong, what Hong Kong government is doing, and having these 2 major institutions like M+, like Palace Museum, I know there's been criticism, which I think sometimes it's not fair, but if you think about them as institutions, it kind of gives us a footprint in the global arts and culture market, or art and culture sector. So I think Hong Kong is already there, and we just need to do more of it and encourage our artists to think global. Because it's great to have a local market, but you also want collectors outside of Hong Kong, in China, or in the other parts of the world, because like I said, your story is worth listening to. So don't just think, I think sometimes I find that Hong Kong, because of the Cantonese, we think it's Hong Kong versus the world. And I have to say, it has to be Hong Kong and the world we've always played, whether we're gateway to China or gateway to Asia. I think Hong Kong is already an international city, definitely on the finance side of it. We just have to now take our bow and take our come forth, don't be shy, and be that cultural ambassador, arts and cultural ambassador, which we're already ahead of other cities in Asia.
And I'd like to add that the art world in Hong Kong has very thankfully never actually been in a silo. Hong Kong has always been an international city. We've never been truly shut off since the creation of our city for these past 100+ years. And even before grand institutions took shape and have opened its doors in these last couple of years, like even pre-war, in terms of antiques, Hong Kong has always been a huge sourcing ground for beautiful antiques that then get purchased and makes its way to other foreign and overseas institutions. So it's also widening people's perspective and knowledge of what art means, what is art. That very old ceramic plate that your grandfather left you that sits on your table might actually be an art piece that you just didn't realize and has passed through many hands before it reached your desk. And those things are very international. And Hong Kong is the epitome of East meets West. We just have to continue what we're doing and not lose faith and hope in that. And also, I would like to add to some advice to artists is that despite all this sort of blossoming of things in the art world, it's important for you to do you and to not sort of look over your shoulder too much or do too many comparisons between yourself and other artists, because that can be soul destroying and you might run the risk of over-referencing, in which case your artwork ceases to be unique. You have to it's a fine balance between the engagement that Alice was mentioning, to not just hide away by yourself, but also to be alone enough so that you're making artwork that's unique to you. So that's really important.
Okay. We have a follow-up question from the same guest. Do women have any role to play in it with this international cultural exchange?
Of course. Absolutely.
What sort of role that women are playing at the moment in this whole big changes in scenario? I think it's a hard question to answer, but maybe you can shed some insight to that.
Well, women has always, I think women were really good with the network. I mean, in terms of the connections, I think women are really good connectors. And I think in this day of divisiveness, I mean, you just have to read the news every day. We don't need more divisiveness around the world. And I think women, it's great to see women leaders now, political leaders, business leaders. And I think companies are finally realizing women can be as successful. I just finished reading Indra Nooyi's a memoir. She talked about her company as impact, having an impact in her mission and impacting on society and all of that. So I think I think the spotlight on women is really deserved. And I think whether it's on the business world, political world, or the art world, we always have a role to play. And I think right now, don't be shy about it. I think some people would say, the men have messed up. I mean, right now, one of the things I'm really worried about is talk of war. Just look at what's happening in Europe. Yes. And I do think, whether women are peacemakers or not, I think that's such a cliche, but I just think because women traditionally are the nurturers, the mothers, and I think we need more of that around the world. Just look at the climate right now. Physically climate, well, right now, today and everywhere in the world, hottest day of the year. I mean, literally, Europe is melting because of the heat wave and all that. And I think women, I think our healing role, our connecting role, is really more needed than ever. And I would, whether it's as artists, whether as politicians, political leaders, I really do think, we just can't leave it to one generation or one gender. I think we have a role to play.
And I think women are more logical than people give us credit for. And to involve us in the boardroom is not to have a soft approach. It's actually a more creative approach at tackling problems. I find women usually to be far more practical in dangerous situations. And also women have this thing going for them where we're not in for the quick wins. Like, I think we sit and observe things for a while before taking meaningful action rather than necessarily just charging ahead. And I think that will give us lasting power in any sort of development and building plans.
Okay. Last question. It's 4:40 right now. We have one more question to go. It's about digital art. What's your take on the role of digitization of art? Some see NFT as a fad. What opportunities are there for the artists in the digital art space?
Plenty. I think digital art is really just a natural progression of artists trying to find new media. So if you take painting as the original medium, I mean, when glass blowing became accessible, people thought they were crazy, and when metalworking became an option, people thought they were crazy as well. So I think it's very easy to just raise eyebrows and sort of have this anti-feeling against new things. But again, no one has a crystal ball, so no one knows whether or not it will be a fad. But I definitely acknowledge digital art as a new art form that is perhaps the only chosen medium for a lot of young artists coming out. So, but just as quickly as people have abandoned cassette tapes and CD players, the question is, how will your digital art have lasting power if all the systems needed to play it are outdated in 2 years? So that's not a threat. That's really a kind gesture. Everyone wants their work to last. So you need to think about sort of the technology behind that.
Alice?
Well, I think digital art, a couple of years ago, Asia Society in New York had a wonderful exhibition on Nam June Paik show. And he's a Korean digital artist that really pioneered it. And he was doing digital art in the 70s in New York. And if you go to Korea now. He's a national treasure. He passed away only a few years, a few decades ago. But if you look at that, people dismiss that, and so I think whenever I hear these, I don't understand digital art in the way that I do, a painting. But for me, it's about creativity. Digital art, whether you create via a paint, a brushstroke, or via, iPad. I've seen some great art. Some of these young artists have come out of using, iPad to create art. In fact, I just had a meeting earlier before this with one of our former curator who mentioned an artist who in later on in life had a stroke and used his iPad to create art. Some of the software that Microsoft had, which is outdated. And remember Matisse? Remember when he was doing the paper ripping and, again, the collage, but, Matisse, the colors toward the end of his life, his eyesight was failing. And a couple of the shows, some of the biggest show I saw last, the major blockbuster was the cutouts at both the Tate in London and in New York. So who's to say what is, good or bad or whatever? So for me, digital art is art. And also another thing, a friend reminded me, it's also building community, especially now when you talk about NFT. It's a community that understands it, or they are promoting it. And who's to say there's not a value in it? For me, I remember 20 years ago when I was here in Hong Kong, this was a height of .com bubble. We had a bubble, but then look at how many companies ended up not a bubble. I mean, Alibaba, for example. So I think NFT will have a shakeout, or crypto, or whatever. But it's really exciting to see that creativity. And I know we work with Art Basel, Art Central, and I know the Digital Art Fair is also something that Hong Kong has hosted. So for me, I'm excited about all art, digital and otherwise. And you never know when you're going to see the next Nam June Paik or the next Henri Matisse. So that's why I'm excited about art in general.
Okay. Really, one last question. Does all these new tech and digital give the new generation artists more chance to develop themselves and to get more exposure?
I think institutions are promoting it. Just look at M+. You have one room that has that digital art, that cross room. I think museums themselves are coming to realize that they need to, these institutions need to change with time. So I find that they're finding space for that, and I do think it's the time has come. I actually am quite optimistic about that development.
Thank you, Alice. Joyce, any comments from all these new technology?
Yeah, I've shared my thoughts, and I just think it's a space it's a huge space that still needs to be explored, and everyone is naturally moving digitally. I think when you walk into a classroom, very few students are writing on pen and paper. And it's just a method of communication, really. I think the concepts that artists come up with are still the same. It's just how they manifest. And if they choose to manifest it in a digital way, well, that's the way that's organic to them right now. So I think as audience and spectators, whether or not you have art knowledge, it's good to be respectful of that. And instead of saying, I don't understand, well, why don't you give it a try? Try to understand.
Thank you, Joyce. Thank you, Alice, and thank you, Joyce. Thank you for joining us today. We're very glad to have you ladies here. And thank you, Alice, again, for doing an interview with us. Joyce,
my pleasure.
For taking us around next week on 28th. We will, this webinar is being recorded, and the recorded live will be played on our website later, and we will have the link sent to you. And for anyone who missed it, part of the webinar, the link will be up soon, and we will send it out through EDM, and it will be posted on our IG, Facebook, LinkedIn, and our own website. Once again, thank you for joining us. We look forward to more collaboration with Asia Society. And Jess Network is an open platform. We did spoke about what we can do on our website, on our new website later. I'm really looking forward to that. And after this, I will look for you. I will look for you ladies again, because I do have a friend that's been bombarding me on my WhatsApp right now. I have a virtual exhibition that I want to do, and it's about female artists. Can I meet Alice? Can I meet Joyce? I'm like, fine.
Happy to do that.
I'll do
Hello,
the connection.
virtual friend.
So that's the connecting part. That's what we do here. We connect people and we try to inspire and empower the younger generation. So thank you again. We'll be seeing you ladies again, and I will be seeing you next week, Joyce. Thank you, Alice. Thank you, Joyce.
Thank you,
Goodbye,
Calvin.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.